question. Has he asked David Seymour if he has ever received political donations from Philip Polkinghorne? If not, why not?
Is this unlawful?
Honourable members, on Monday, the Honourable David Seymour drove a vehicle onto the steps of Parliament. He stopped when a security officer intervened. I commend that officer for his actions. His long experience in the role will have given him the necessary judgment to deal with a difficult situation. I doubt he would have ever expected to have to tell a member of the House not to drive a vehicle onto the steps of the building, particularly given that it was a repeat of the 2003 event, and in light of the enhanced security arrangements that Parliament has since put in place. In consideration of this matter, it's clear there are no standing orders that could reasonably support a referral to the Privileges Committee. I've expressed to Mr Seymour my strong displeasure at his actions and my concern at his belief that MPs should be able to do what he did is of right. They do not. The Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, I appreciate that the ruling that you gave at the beginning has moved on somewhat from then, but you didn't sit down, so I didn't want to interrupt with a point of order while you were on your feet. The statement that you just read regarding David Seymour's actions yesterday omitted one piece of information which I think there is public interest in knowing, and that is whether in fact you or your office had told David Seymour and the organisers of that event prior to that event that it was not acceptable and that permission had not been granted for that Land Rover to be driven up the steps of Parliament. David Seymour's comments to the media at the time was that he understood that you had given permission. If it's clear that you hadn't given permission, then that in itself is a material piece of information.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what was said, because I haven't looked at a great deal of the media on this, other than the short snippets of the whole event that have been published in various places. We could not find in any of the records of Parliament or other archives any reference to that particular event. And I'm surprised that in the last couple of days, if such photographs or otherwise existed, then they would have come to light. So perhaps that was just a bit of urban myth. In any event, they were told they could come and have a photograph taken in front of the steps, but most definitely not drive the vehicle up. Now, what was conveyed to Mr Seymour at the time is not something I can know.
Mr Speaker, speaking further to the point of order, I think the reason that that's important is Mr Seymour is on record, and you will have read this if you've been following the recent media coverage, effectively of saying that members of Parliament should be able to do whatever they want unless there is a specific rule that says that they shouldn't. I disagree with that characterisation. I don't think that's in keeping with the standards that the public should be able to expect of members of Parliament. That may well be within the realms of privilege, because if he was told that he was not allowed to do that and has done it anyway, I think it would be very difficult to argue that there isn't a question of privilege there.
Well, clearly there'd be a need for considerable investigation along those lines. My own view is that the public will make their own determination about the appropriateness or otherwise of the action.
Supplementary. Does he stand by his comment that David Seymour has not breached the Cabinet Manual, given the Cabinet Manual says that ministers must conduct themselves in a manner appropriate to their office, are expected to act lawfully, and are seen to uphold the highest ethical and behavioural standards, including good judgment, given recent revelations that David Seymour intervened in a police murder investigation, referred a sexual abuse survivor to an ACT Party lawyer rather than to the police, and just yesterday, potentially illegally attempted to drive a Land Rover up the front steps of Parliament?
Yes.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Is he therefore confident that driving a Land Rover up the front steps of Parliament is a lawful activity?
Ultimately, that's a decision for the Speaker, and he's addressed that today.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Well, does he agree with Christopher Luxon, who said that of ministers involving themselves in police matters, quote, "This would not be tolerated under a national government I lead. New Zealanders expect ministers to hold themselves to the highest standards." If so, what happened to those standards?
Well, as I said yesterday, I made my position clear. He wrote the letter before he was actually a government minister, before the government was formed.
Supplementary question. How can New Zealanders have any respect for his leadership when his own soon-to-be Deputy Prime Minister called him ill-advised for questioning his decision to undermine the separation between politics and the judicial system?
Again, I made my position clear yesterday on the letter. He wrote it before he was in government and before he was a minister. There's a government focused on economic growth.
Supplementary question. Has he asked David Seymour if he has ever received political donations from Philip Polkinghorne? If not, why not?
No, and I have nothing else to say on it.
Given David Seymour has refused to answer publicly whether he has received donations from Philip Polkinghorne, and the Prime Minister is the only person who can judge whether there is a conflict of interest with regard to David Seymour's interventions in the case, why hasn't he asked him?
Because the minister was not a minister at the time in which he sent the letter. He was an MP outside the government and not a minister. Very simple.
A point of order, right on, Chris Hipkins.
The issue of whom people have received political donations from is material to conflicts of interest now, presently, regardless of whether the donation was received before they were a minister. The receipt of a political donation from someone can cause conflict of interest. The Prime Minister is responsible for managing cabinet conflicts of interest. If he is not asking ministers that question, he's not doing his job.
Well, just want to make the point that the question starts to border on that interface between the Prime Minister and the leader of a party, and I think that's one that the House has wrestled with. Yes, it does, because it happened when the Prime Minister was a leader of the opposition and Mr Seymour was a leader of another party. And at the moment I'd like to take advice as to whether or not where exactly that fits into the arrangement. So I'll come back to you in a few minutes.
While you consider that, Mr Speaker, you might like to consider the fact that there are ministers in the current government who have exempted themselves from decision-making processes concerning donors where the donor gave them the money before the last election and before they were ministers. The Prime Minister is the minister responsible for enforcing standards around conflicts of interest. If the Prime Minister has already decided that ministers who received donations before they were ministers should exempt themselves from decision-making, then the question that I asked him is absolutely within order.
Is this unlawful? What are you doing, David? You're breaking the law.
I just think we live in an insane world where it was perfectly legal, no one was harmed in 1948. The only danger that was created was actually from the security guard who put himself in danger, and I had to stop when he put himself in the way of the wheels.
The Prime Minister giving Seymour a ticket to ride.
Do you think a Cabinet Minister driving up the steps of Parliament is acceptable conduct?
Well, look, those are issues for David Seymour to address with the Speaker, I would imagine. What I'd say to you is I'm just not interested in those political sideshows, as I'd say them. I want to get things done. I'm very, very focused on making sure we drive economic growth.
In 2003, National MP Shane Ardern was charged by police with disorderly conduct for driving Myrtle the tractor up the stairs. He was eventually let off with a warning.
Do you think of yourself as above the rules of Parliament?
No, of course not. I'm bound by the rules of Parliament, and I'm judged by my peers, and I always follow those rules.
David Seymour has far more important things to be focusing his attention on at the moment than ram-raiding the steps of Parliament.
Seymour has had a tumultuous few weeks, starting with the naming of his former party president Tim Jago as a sexual offender, and revelations he was aware of the allegations 2 months prior to Jago's arrest and him stepping down as the president of the ACT Party. It's also been revealed he had responded to a survivor's wife with the contact details of an employment lawyer. Then this weekend it was revealed by the Herald that Seymour in 2022 had written in support of Remuera eye surgeon Philip Polkinghorne during the investigation into his wife's death.
Personally, I thought sending the letter was ill-advised. He's aware of my views on that.
In opposition, Seymour was highly critical of Stuart Nash, who was sacked as police minister for boasting about calling the police commissioner about a case. In a statement in 2023, Seymour wrote, "We do not want to live in a country where politicians get involved in police prosecution decisions."
Public confidence in the justice system relies on making sure that actually, police investigations and political intervention are separated. That's really a critical part of our system.
I think David Seymour has clearly demonstrated repeatedly in recent days that he is not suitable to be a minister, and Christopher Luxon should remove him from that job.
Well, as I said, there's been no breach of the Cabinet Manual. He didn't do this as a minister. I just think sending the letter was ill-advised. That's my personal view on it.
A very unfortunate series of self-inflicted events for the self-proclaimed party of law and order.